Okay, so this is, instead of just calling these ramblings, these are just going to be Site 27 campaign diaries, I guess. Um, because otherwise I'm just talking about the thing. So, have my second session. Again, still, this is literally the second session I've ever DM'd. Party, they set off into the city, and it was mostly just the majority of the session was a really long, like exploratory session. They were working their way through the city, and as far as I was concerned, I think like 90% of it was improv. At least, well, I use that term a little. I don't know how to word it. Yeah, it's technically improv. I knew that there was going to be a lot of things, and I think this is definitely my style. I prepare a certain amount of things, particularly monsters. I'll prepare monsters at least loosely. Like, okay, yeah, they'll attack in this way, and, they might have this special mechanic. And then I also have some numbers written down for, like, the relative strength of the party, of the current party. Like, okay, they can roughly do about this much damage per round, or like each party member can do like this much damage per round without using resources. They can do this much damage with using resources, that kind of stuff. So it makes it easier to kind of design my monsters in a really specific way and give them certain amounts of HP and certain amounts of damage they can do, things like that. And then add resistances and vulnerabilities to make the players think creatively. But I haven't gotten that far enough into it to see if that really works. But the vulnerabilities works great because I'm using a homebrew version of vulnerabilities where I've gone over that before, so I'm not going to go over it again here. That seems to work well, but for this whole session there was no combat. They managed to sneak by most enemies, and also as we were going I was realizing like, London should be a bit sparser, and that party doesn't know why, but it should be pretty empty. And that's spoilers, but there's some things going on, and I figured out some details along the way. I just had some rough ideas penned down, and then as you go in, you kind of figure them out. Like, I know I needed Burke to, I wanted to have a part where they communicated with Burke or talked to him, whether they catch up to him and then he escapes, or whether they talk over walkie-talkies, over the radio. And that was the route I ended up going with, that he left them a note to call them, because thinking about how Burke is, he knows the city way better than they do, and he's sneaky and quick, so they probably wouldn't have been able to catch up to him unless they were really fast and maybe managed to avoid that first combat. But they didn't, so they didn't have enough of a chance to get into the city fast enough and catch up. But those weren't like hard-coded moments that I had from the start. Not like, okay, yeah, Burke is waiting at this building, and if they don't get there within a certain amount of time that he leaves, no, nothing like that. It's just, okay, well, this happened, so it probably makes sense that they're not going to have time. And it also, that you can use that kind of idea to reward players, like, okay, you skipped a combat. That means you get to whatever the key event is going forward sooner than you would have otherwise, and maybe that changes some things. Either you get the drop on enemies if it's like a combat you set up later on, or maybe an NPC you're tracking, you catch up to a lot sooner, but that ended up not happening. Then they got a lot farther into the city. They dodged some bobbies that were chasing them. They did some shenanigans. Lex is always very good at shenanigans. did some, had some interactions here and there that mostly filled time. Then I started having, they ended up, like, right after a break, you take a break halfway through. And right after break, they ended up on some rooftops. I was like, all right, I kind of put them on the rooftop because I wanted them to get, like, another, like, good view of the city moving forward. But then that got my gears turning. Like, again, I try to let ideas come up naturally, and then see what I can work with and what I can pull out of the loose situation I've set up. So they're up on a rooftop, and I'm thinking, okay, they're in a denser part of the city now. Burke has been here for a while. He's been in London both previously. He's had a lot of time to get the layout and maybe set stuff up to make travel for himself easier. That's a great idea. So he's managed to set up a multitude of makeshift bridges from building to building, so that once he gets to this part of the city where travel is really difficult and the bodies are really dense, now he can just run along the rooftops. And even if eyes in the sky see him, the bobbies can't get up there easily, so he can relatively easily evade capture, or evade the bobbies' sight, blah blah blah. So party gets up there, and they notice there's a bunch of makeshift bridges, and in particular they come up to a really wide, like, highway, like a main highway in London. I don't know what the main streets were in the late 1800s, but I'm not looking that up, so I don't need to know that. But there's tons of bobbies, there's tons of eyes in the sky everywhere, so they could try to go down and sneak through, but it's going to be difficult. Or a few buildings down, there's a big ass bridge going over. There we go. That'll let them sneak over. But I knew there was going to be something from Burke, because this is Burke is he knows he's being followed, evident through the little interaction that they had earlier through the radio, where Burke just insulted them all and told them to go home, mostly because he wants them to. He doesn't want to be bothered with this MTF tracking him. So he's going to try to intimidate them into going home or persuade them. And I didn't have any kind of, like, roles happen. Just like, because if they did get intimidated and go home, this adventure would be over right away, and these characters would all probably be shit canned. So there's that. But just wanted to get that, like, feeling across that he was going to try to intimidate the whole party. Maybe intimidate isn't the right word, but so I set it up that there's that one bridge over there. Then there's a few buildings away, there's some more of these small makeshift bridges from building to building instead of over the whole highway. But there's a few buildings they have to cross first. So I had the first building, like, within 6 feet, everybody can make that jump real easy. Then the next one, it was a little farther, like it was at the edge of a lot of the characters' range as far as they could long jump. Then the next one was at the edge of the strongest characters' ability to long jump, the most athletic characters. So everyone else wouldn't be able to make that jump, so they had to solve this puzzle in some way. They had to get across. Now, one of the characters can Misty Step, but he can only bring himself. Then there's that. He could get off, or he could get over there, but he could jump anyway. He doesn't have to spend a Misty Step. So they ended up, like, making a rope, and they could shimmy across and stuff, and it worked out pretty well. And I did have the weaker characters roll to actually get across, but it wasn't because, like, it was, like, really difficult. I was just having them roll because, one, rolling dice is fun, and two, I had them roll in case they rolled really low. So if they rolled, like, a 1, a 2, or a 3, then there were going to be complications. Exactly what those complications were, I don't know. Maybe the rope would have started to snap or started to fray. Maybe they would have just lost their grip. Depends on the role and depends on exactly how I felt in the moment. But that's the thing. You wait until these things come up. You don't have to come up with things ahead of time and try to guess what's going on. But, being able to improv, sometimes it works. I'm sure there's going to be, even if I keep with this style, there's going to be moments where I don't really come up with anything. And in that case, you can rely on, just dice rolls to just, all right. If I don't really know if something's going to be good or bad, I might just roll a d6. And then depending on what I roll, that'll help me decide. You can always use dice to do that. But so they got across, and they're starting to inspect all these bridges, and they roll pretty high, and they don't find anything. And now you got to be careful with your language whenever you're doing stuff like this. Say, in this scenario, they're looking for traps on these bridges. They're looking for traps, for bombs on the bridges. And let's say they roll high. Now, in the moment, I just said, oh yeah, you go over it, you don't find anything. There's nothing there. I worded it specifically so they can have some confidence, because also they know they rolled high, because that's just a thing. But, you can be careful with your descriptions. So, in a case where they rolled high, I could have worded it, you go over everything. You pull some of the material back, you check as many cavities as you can find. There is nothing in there. You're pretty confident that this bridge is untrapped. And that's a big thing. You tell the character that they feel confident about this. But if they had rolled low, then I might have worded it okay, now I know there's no traps here, but I might have worded it okay, you go over this bridge and you're trying to pull back material, but it just doesn't give. There's some cavities in there. This is a makeshift ramshackle bridge. It's sturdy enough, but there's got to be cavities and pockets in here, but you can't get in there to check. So you're not entirely sure. You don't see any evidence on the outside, or over the majority of the bridge, but there's some spots you just can't access. I might say something like that. And then if the players want to get some confirmation, they might interpret that in a few ways. Either we need to check it more, they get a stronger character to help them do that, and then they can roll again. Something like that. Or simply they just decide, yeah, it's good enough, and just go with it. So it could be either one of those. But then they get over to this big bridge, they do an investigation check, some of the other characters start walking across, and boom, there's some bombs on that. And earlier they failed some stealth checks for Burke to notice them kind of at long range. They weren't going to have to pass very hard. It wasn't a very high DC, but the majority of the group rolled below an 8. So Burke kind of saw them at long range, and he set off the timer on these bombs because he wanted to try to catch them when they were close to that bridge. He didn't want to just blow it up immediately. But it was going out. So, they found the bombs, and I think this was kind of my mistake. I gave it, when they discovered the bombs, there was a 9-second timer. It could have been a little longer. I could have made it 20 seconds. I was trying to make it a little too tight. That was, I think one of the mistakes I made this session, but that kind of mistake is really small. Because, as a result, 2 of the characters ran across the bridge. I had them make dex saves, I think, to avoid the explosion. And I forgot that he had, that Laszlo has evasion. Gotta make sure to say these things. I don't manage your character, you do. If you have evasion for being a rogue, you gotta use that shit. So he could have taken a little less damage, but regardless. So they get across, they help each other and reduce the damage a little bit. So 2 of the characters get across, and the other 3 like retreat back, and now they have to get across that big highway. And partially because there was just a huge explosion. The majority of the bobbies in the area are now preoccupied with this big explosion and rubble. So they effectively get some cover, and I think I just gave them advantage on the stealth checks. And I gave like Eye in the Skies and the bobbies disadvantage on perception checks to spot them. So they made it across pretty easily. They had to get down through a building. There was nothing really important in the building. Then they get up into another building, the same building that the other 2 characters are on. They get up there, and the last stairwell up to the roof is missing. The door is up there, but it's closed and there's no stairwell, so they have to figure out a way. And so they end up using some telepathy. They get the other characters to open the door, and it works out. It's just like a really minor type of thing for them to overcome. But instead of just hand waving it, like let's make them interact with this in a certain way. And it took like 5 minutes, a little extra time, but then now they can start using these bridges, and passage is really easy, so it goes by really quick. They get all the way into the more administrative district of London, like where all the government buildings are. And they get past all these bridges down onto the street, and they start to find all these littered dead bodies or dead bobbies. And they find evidence of a struggle, lots of blood. Now, none of the bobbies have blood, so they can surmise that this is Burke's blood. And the blood is really pronounced. There's a lot of it, and then it trails off really fast. And this happens one more time, and there's even more blood the second time. Evidently, Burke got into some fights with some of these bobbies because he couldn't sneak by them. Maybe he thought there weren't going to be as many over here. And as soon as they get past this, they don't find any more bobbies either. But they all surmise that he's using SCP-407 to heal himself from this grievous damage. Which is something they would have seen earlier if they had actually run into it. Like, they could have shot him, and then he would have escaped, and then put the headphones on to play 407 just to him, because that's one of the other things he's doing. He's using headphones so that it's only affecting him. So if any of my players are watching this video, there's a little nugget. You got to go outside of the game to my YouTube channel to find secrets. That's how I get you. But, I mean, that's not a big thing. But, so they surmise that, they think, and then also with all the bridges that have been made, like maybe he's working with someone. And I will neither confirm nor deny that. But, you'll see. So then they get forward, they find a lot of these wretches, these beggars that have been around the city that they've had some interactions with up until now. And all the documentation says to not interact with them and not give them anything. But that's mostly because it's kind of a waste of time. They don't bother you. But the one player, Lex, his character Richter, has been giving the wretches stuff. And that will come into effect. I don't know if it's going to come into effect during the upcoming boss fight, or if it's going to come into effect later on, because I'm not going to just hand wave them getting out of the city. They don't just get out of it for free. They're going to have to do something. But they're going to have to at least like make some checks to get out of the city easily enough. Especially because they have to get back across that really heavily guarded street. And maybe they'll just decide to fucking book it after there. I'll think about that a little bit. But either way, there's a lot of these wretches, and they're not begging anymore. They're walking around like upright and clean, or cleaner. but they're walking around upright, and they seem happy. It's weird. Maybe this is where they go when they, whenever they receive something, they go to the administrative district or something. Just kind of random thoughts. But, a lot of that was for flavor. And they get to Parliament, and they got an idea that's where he was heading. But they get up there. They get up to Parliament. Okay, we've got some road work going around this side. Yeah, gotta wait. This is some goofy road work. Okay. Yeah, they get to Parliament, and let me just sneak by these guys. So they get to Parliament, and they decide that they're going to take a short rest to recharge some of their abilities, especially because Gersh has used some stuff at this point. So they're waiting. It's a quick short rest, and I have short rest is homebrewed, so it's like 5 minutes. It's just a breather. It's whatever. It keeps the game moving. I'm not going to have like 1 hour short rests. I really don't like, but that's a separate discussion. So, which I think I did. Yeah, I had a video about rests that I think has 0 views. Anyway, then after the rest, they go into Parliament, and they find a lot of like old corpses, like 100-year-old corpses, just littering all the different meeting rooms that are in Parliament. And they go through it. They find the last room, and they find a mass of plants curled up in the center. Like, okay, that's probably Burke. And they sort of start getting into position. Laszlo gets down onto the floor, or like onto the main floor where this plant creature is. He looks under. The vines are swirling around. It seems to be reacting to any kind of sound. He looks under, and he sees a little bit of that beige trench coat that he spotted Burke wearing in the distance. It's like, okay, it's probably Burke. Then he sees it, and what the fuck does he do? He's like, hey guys, it's Burke. That sets the thing off, and it wakes up. And then immediately starts filling the room. It's this ghastly creature covered in what look like giant teeth, like just the front teeth, kind of like almost like scales made of teeth. There's some tatters of the trench coat. There's a Walkman at its side with the headphone cord going up into what should be his head, but it's just a shrub. It's just like a mass of leaves. And then there's tons of closed sunflower seeds that all open to reveal eyes and mouths. And then around it, like these 4 large vines are snaking out from its neck. And it's holding itself up with 2 of these vines, and 2 of them splay out. 2 of the characters fail a dex save, and they take some damage. And then combat would begin here. I get everybody's initiative, and the session ends. Which I don't like necessarily ending a session at the start of a combat, but it's okay. You know. So, I guess I really just wanted to talk about how much of that session was improv. It's like, I didn't have the bridges set up, I didn't have the layout of buildings, I didn't have most of that. That was all pretty much improv. The exact layout, certain things, and what exactly was going to happen in the Parliament. And I could have been clearer with certain directions. Like, there was a little bit of confusion as far as what the street layout was, but it was like chaotic enough, and I could kind of keep them on track. And anytime they had a question like, wait, which way are we going? It's like, okay, it's this way. Yeah, this is over to your right. And, that's pretty common. Because I didn't lay out any kind of map. So, that was a thing. Realizing I'm definitely more improv heavy. I don't need a whole lot of material. You just need bullet points, really. And if you're coming up with a dungeon, it's just like, all right, yeah, you go in here. Like, you might have traps and stuff prepared, but you don't need the exact layout prepared, and you don't need a point by point itinerary of when things are going to get done, and if they're not here soon enough, then this door closes and this bit of treasure falls into lava, or you don't need that kind of stuff. It's just, you just need a rough layout of the dungeon. That definitely helps because it's a dungeon, but just some traps, some other stuff, you don't really need it. But you all, a big thing is you got to make sure players have the opportunity to speak up. You say oh yeah, you guys are running down this way, and as you pass this alleyway, you see something, and as you keep describing, either you pause and say, okay, you guys or you guys are running down this alley. You might suggest stuff and lead the characters a little bit, but yeah, you guys are running down this main road with no cover. You're being chased. There's an alleyway that looks like it's tighter and it has some cover. Do you guys go down that way, or do you keep going along the main highway? And they'll usually speak up and say something. Whereas, as opposed to you just saying, okay, you're running down this highway. There's an alleyway on the right that you guys run right by, and you just ignore it because they're not speaking up because you're talking and they don't want to interrupt you. But once, as a DM, once you get on a roll on describing things and what's going on, maybe that's going to be too difficult. To allow the players to just allow the players to just interrupt whenever they want, or give them the space to speak. I'm definitely a proponent of trying to leave gaps so that players can try to interject and say certain things. I think it did an okay job in regards to that. Yeah, I'm not chancing this. This road is not clean. But yeah, try to improv stuff, and yeah, just kind of finding exactly what my style is. Yeah, that's about it. Just campaign diaries. There'll probably be more of these. See you.